You might think a mansion is just walls, floors, and ceilings, that it's nothing more than wood, stone, and nails, that hidden rooms are just part of the charm of an old house. But sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it waits. Welcome to Minute 60, where we tell stories that are real. Stories that linger long after the lights go out. Before we begin, take a moment and think. Where are you listening from tonight? Type it in the comments. We'd love to know. And ask yourself, have you ever stepped into a house that felt wrong? Heard doors creak when no one was near? Felt a presence you couldn't explain? If you have, share it below. Some of these experiences may even appear in future videos. Now, turn off the lights, settle in, and listen carefully. This story is not for the faint of heart. I had never seen a house like it. Built over 150 years ago, the mansion loomed at the end of a narrow, overgrown driveway. Its walls were brick, blackened with age, ivy crawling like veins across the facade. The windows were tall, elegant, yet clouded with dust and grime. The wooden shutters hung crooked, some broken, some stubbornly clinging to rusted hinges. Every step toward it felt heavier, as if the house itself was aware of my approach. I was there with a small renovation crew. Our plan was straightforward: repair the floors, restore the walls, modernize the wiring. But the moment I stepped across the threshold, I realized straightforward was a lie. The foyer smelled of damp wood, old stone, and a metallic tang that I couldn't place. My flashlight cut through the shadows, revealing a grand staircase winding upward like a spine. The wallpaper had yellowed with time, peeling at the edges. Dust floated in the beams of light, dancing like motes of memory. I ran my hand along the banister. It felt cold, unnervingly cold, as if it had absorbed decades of history, both beautiful and terrible. "This place is huge," whispered Mark, one of the carpenters, breaking the silence. I nodded. "Stay sharp. Old houses always have surprises." We moved deeper into the mansion. The floorboards groaned under our weight, echoing unnaturally in the vast emptiness. Every room held remnants of its past: faded portraits, furniture draped in yellowed sheets, chandeliers coated in decades of dust. The house was alive in its own way, listening, watching, breathing through the vents and the cracks in the walls. The first odd thing happened in the dining hall. A long table sat beneath a chandelier that hung like a skeleton. As we unpacked tools, I noticed something strange. A single chair had been pulled out, angled slightly toward the doorway, as if someone, or something, had been sitting there, waiting. "Probably just a gust from the window," I said, though my voice betrayed me. I didn't believe it. Later, while inspecting the kitchen, I felt it, a presence brushing past me, subtle, intangible. The hairs on my neck stood up. My co-workers didn't notice. They were too busy checking the plumbing, but I knew. I had read enough haunted house stories to recognize the feeling. The house had not forgotten us. That night, as we set up sleeping arrangements for the crew, the mansion seemed to come alive. The wind whispered through cracks in the windows, carrying faint echoes of laughter, or perhaps crying. Doors that had been closed now creaked open slightly, just enough to catch your eye. Shadows seemed to move independently of our flashlights, stretching and bending unnaturally across the walls. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the renovation plans, but every so often a floorboard would creak above me, though no one was upstairs. A soft thud would echo from the basement. The air smelled metallic, like blood, though none of us were hurt. I told myself it was just old plumbing, the house settling. I told myself a lot of things that night. The next morning, we found the first undeniable evidence that we were not alone. While replacing a rotted floorboard in the library, Mark found a hidden trapdoor beneath a faded rug. The wood was old but sturdy, the latch rusted shut. I pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Cold air poured up, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something we could not name. "Should we check it?" Mark asked, voice trembling. I hesitated. The logical part of my mind said yes, there could be storage, old wine, maybe mechanical systems. The other part, the part that had been whispering unease all night, said no, but curiosity won. We descended slowly, flashlights cutting through the blackness. The stairs led to a cellar unlike any I had seen. Walls of stone, slick with moisture, extended into shadows that seemed to breathe. Crates and barrels were stacked haphazardly. Tools of old construction lay scattered, and then we saw it. A series of drawings etched into the walls. Primitive, almost childlike, but unmistakably deliberate. Figures with elongated limbs, faces twisted into expressions of fear and pain. Symbols we did not recognize, circles intersecting with lines, spirals that seemed to draw your eye in. The air was heavier here, thick with the metallic tang, and every breath felt like inhaling history itself. I stepped closer. One of the figures on the walls seemed to shift under the beam of my flashlight. My stomach churned. I wanted to step back, but some part of me, a foolish part, wanted to understand. That's when the whispers began. Low, guttural, almost imperceptible at first. "Leave! Leave!" The sound came from the walls themselves, vibrating through the stone. My flashlight flickered. Mark froze, pale, staring at the drawings. I think we should go," he whispered. We climbed the stairs as fast as we could, hearts pounding, the whispers following us like a shadow. The mansion seemed to pulse, the walls tightening, pressing against us. When we finally emerged into the kitchen, the air felt lighter, almost, but the unease lingered. As we caught our breath, we realized the mansion had left a gift, or a warning. The hidden staircase had closed on its own, the trapdoor firmly in place. No sign that it had ever been there. No hint that we had not imagined everything. I couldn't shake it. Every creak, every shadow, every metallic tang in the air reminded me that the mansion had noticed us, watched us, tested us, and it was far from done. That night, alone in what had become our makeshift office, I heard it. Soft footsteps above, deliberate and slow. The air grew colder, shadows lengthened unnaturally across the walls. A door slammed shut in the distance, though no wind stirred, and in the corner of my eye I swore I saw a figure, elongated, bending impossibly, before vanishing. I told myself I was imagining it. I was not. By morning the crew was exhausted but determined. We had work to do, walls to repair, floors to replace, wiring to modernize, but the mansion had reminded us that it had rules. It was patient, deliberate, observant, and it had marked us. I realized then that renovating a mansion is not just about tools, wood, and nails. It is about respecting the memory embedded in every wall, every floorboard, every shadow. Some houses carry history that refuses to die. Some houses remember, some houses watch. And this mansion, this 150-year-old giant of stone and wood, it had remembered us. The day began with a sense of false normalcy. The sun poured weakly through the mansion's tall windows, illuminating layers of dust and cobwebs. My crew and I had settled into a rhythm, unpacking tools, examining floors, and mapping out walls that needed repair. Yet beneath this mundane work, the mansion seemed to hum with awareness. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind, every shifting shadow carried intent, a silent message that we were not alone. I tried to focus on the renovation checklist, floors first, wiring second, walls third. But the mansion had its own pace, its own rules. Each room seemed to resist our presence, as if it were testing our patience, watching our reactions. Shadows pooled unnaturally in corners. A chair would be slightly out of place when we returned to a room, though none of us had moved it. The metallic tang lingered faintly, curling into our noses, a reminder of the house's silent observation. Around mid-morning, we decided to explore the west wing, a section rumoured to have once been the servants' quarters. The hallway was narrow, lined with peeling wallpaper and broken sconces. The floorboards here groaned with every step, each creak amplified, echoing unnaturally as if the mansion were announcing our presence. Dust motes floated in the light beams, each one moving like a miniature spectre. As we entered the first room, I noticed something odd. The floorboards appeared newer here, but scratched. Someone, or something, had walked here recently. The scratches weren't from furniture. They were deliberate, sharp and uneven, like claws marking territory. My stomach churned. I whispered to the crew, "Be careful, there's more history here than we realise." Mark, always sceptical, chuckled nervously. "It's just an old house settling, probably rodents." I wanted to believe him, but I didn't. Further down the hall, we found a door hidden behind a tattered curtain. The wood was warped, the knob rusted. I pressed my ear against it, nothing, but when I turned the knob it rattled violently as if the mansion itself resisted our entry. We exchanged glances. I nodded, and together we pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, windowless, lined with shelves. Old boxes filled the floor, covered in decades of dust. A strange smell like wet earth and iron rose from the corner. On one shelf I found a journal, its leather cover cracked and brittle. I opened it carefully. The pages were filled with scrawled writing, some in neat cursive, some jagged and desperate. The entries told of the mansion's past residents, but not the ones we had expected. Names and dates, spanning more than a century, detailed strange occurrences, whispers in empty rooms, shadows that moved independently, objects that disappeared and reappeared in odd places. One entry mentioned a hidden basement, long sealed, where the air was thick with a metallic smell and an unnatural cold. As I read aloud to the crew, a shiver ran down my spine. The journal wasn't old history, it was a warning. Suddenly a soft thump echoed from the floor above. We froze. The mansion was quiet again, but not silent. The hum of awareness lingered, pressing against our senses. Every nerve in my body screamed that we were being observed. The shadows in the room seemed to lengthen, bending slightly toward us before snapping back to normal. I motioned for the crew to keep working, but quietly we decided to explore the possibility of that hidden basement. Back in the hallway, I traced the journal's descriptions to a spot beneath the staircase. There, hidden under a loose floorboard, was a latch. My hands trembled as I lifted it, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. Cold air surged upward, carrying the metallic tang, curling into our lungs. The basement was not just a storage space, it was alive, deliberate, waiting. "Do we go down?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. I swallowed hard. Curiosity battled fear, but I knew this was the reason we had been drawn here. Step by careful step, we descended. The stairs were slick with moisture, the walls pressed inward, rough stone scraping against our sleeves. The air grew colder with every step, heavier, suffocating. Shadows danced against the flashlight beams, forming shapes that seemed both human and wrong. At the bottom, we found a wide cellar, lined with stone walls and filled with crates, barrels, and broken furniture. The metallic tang was nearly unbearable. The room was silent, but not empty. Against the far wall, a series of marks caught my eye, scratches in the stone, deep, jagged, and deliberate. They formed symbols that matched those in the journal, circles intersected with lines, spirals twisting inward like they wanted to trap you. My flashlight flickered, as if the mansion itself had reached out, testing me. Then I heard it, a whisper, low and guttural. "Leave." It echoed through the stone walls, vibrating in my chest. My friends froze, staring into the darkness. I swallowed, trying to keep calm. The mansion had rules, and it was reminding us that we had crossed them. We explored further, discovering small rooms tucked behind stone walls, each containing remnants of a life long forgotten, a child's toy, a broken chair, rusted tools, and in every corner, shadows seemed to move independently, bending, elongating, observing. The mansion was alive, deliberate, and aware. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning down here. Every sound was amplified, the drip of water from the ceiling, the scrape of stone under our boots, the faintest shuffle in the corner of the room. My heart pounded in rhythm with the mansion's unseen pulse. Eventually, we climbed back to the main floor, shaken but alive. The hidden basement had made its mark on us. We were no longer just renovators. We were intruders, witnesses, observers of something that refused to die. That night, as we rested in what had become our temporary quarters, I felt the mansion's presence more acutely than ever. Footsteps above, soft creaks from empty rooms, a whispering wind through sealed windows. And in the corner of my eye, I swore I saw a shadow, elongated and impossible, bend before disappearing. I told myself I was tired, exhausted, overworked, but I knew better. The mansion was awake and it had noticed us. The following morning, the mansion felt heavier, almost aware of our intentions before we acted. We had decided to focus on the east wing, a part of the house rumoured to have been sealed for decades. The wallpaper was thick with age, peeling in jagged strips. Dust floated in the sunlight that filtered through cracked windows. Floorboards creaked unnaturally under our weight, as if complaining about our intrusion. Every step carried a warning we could not ignore. I motioned for the crew to proceed cautiously. "This section is old, likely unstable. Watch your step." Even as I spoke, I could feel it, something observing from the corners, unseen yet present. Shadows seemed to stretch along the walls, bending unnaturally when I tried to focus. Every instinct screamed that we were being tested, measured. The mansion was alive, patient, deliberate. We reached a small hallway leading to several rooms, all closed with heavy wooden doors. Each door had a label, some faded beyond recognition. One in particular caught my attention. The number 13 etched into the doorframe, nearly invisible under layers of grime. The door was slightly ajar, though no one had touched it. "Probably just warped from humidity," Mark whispered. I nodded, but I didn't believe him. The air was colder here, heavier. Every breath brought the metallic tang we had come to recognize curling in our lungs. Inside, the room appeared ordinary at first glance. A single chair in the center, a small desk pushed against the wall, and a wardrobe with peeling paint. But as I stepped further, the air grew thicker, almost suffocating. Shadows pooled in corners, bending as though alive, stretching toward the center of the room. On the desk I noticed a small journal, different from the one we found in the hidden basement. Its pages were brittle, filled with detailed accounts of renovations attempted over the decades. Each entry spoke of strange occurrences, walls that shifted overnight, doors that appeared where none had existed before, whispers in empty rooms and shadows that moved independently. I read aloud one passage. "The mansion does not forgive intruders. It watches, waits, and allows only those it deems worthy to leave unscathed. Every renovation brings new rules. Every change awakens old memories." The words chilled me. Suddenly a low thud echoed from the floor above. The sound was deliberate, heavy, almost deliberate in its timing. The crew froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding. I motioned for silence. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. We explored further, finding another door hidden behind a false panel in the wall. The wood was warped, the latch rusted. Prying it open revealed a narrow staircase leading to another hidden room, smaller, windowless, and suffocatingly dark. Cold air surged upward, carrying that metallic tang that had haunted us since the basement. Inside, we discovered remnants of a life long gone, old furniture, faded photographs, a broken mirror. But what caught my attention were the scratches on the floor, deep and deliberate. They formed patterns that matched the symbols we had seen in the basement. Circles, spirals, lines intersecting, primitive, deliberate, unnerving. The shadows seemed to bend toward us as we explored, stretching impossibly, twisting against the walls. A whisper echoed, low and guttural. "Leave! Leave!" It reverberated through the room, through our bones, pressing against sanity itself. Mark, visibly shaken, whispered, "We shouldn't be here." I nodded, though a part of me wanted to continue. The mansion had drawn us here, and I needed to understand why. We spent hours tracing the hidden passages, each room revealing more signs of past occupants who had encountered the mansion's awareness. Personal items left behind, diaries, journals, all spoke of fear, observation, and something that did not sleep. The mansion had memory, intent, patience. By nightfall we returned to the main hall, exhausted. The air had grown colder, the shadows longer. The mansion seemed to pulse with awareness, deliberate in every creak of the floorboards, every draft that whispered through broken windows. That night, as I tried to sleep in what had become our makeshift office, I heard footsteps above, deliberate and slow. The metallic tang thickened, curling into my lungs. Shadows stretched across the room, bending unnaturally. And in the corner of my eye I swore I saw a figure, elongated, bending impossibly, then vanishing. Sleep was impossible. The mansion had left its mark. We were no longer just renovators, we were witnesses, intruders, in a house that had rules older than any of us. By the fourth day, the mansion had made its presence undeniable. Every hallway, every room, every shadow carried intent. The whispers, soft at first, had grown louder, almost rhythmic, as if orchestrated by the house itself. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of the broken curtains seemed deliberate, measured to press against our nerves, to test our resolve. We had returned to the hidden east wing, determined to finish clearing debris and inspecting the walls for structural repairs. But the mansion was no longer a simple workplace. It was a trap, a sentient entity aware of every step we took. As we entered the first room, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath became visible in the air, curling like smoke. Shadows bent and stretched unnaturally along the walls. A single chair had been moved to the center of the room, facing the door. My stomach sank. We had not moved it. "This is not normal," Mark whispered, his voice tight with fear. I nodded silently. I had felt it too, the awareness, deliberate in every movement. The mansion was judging us, watching, measuring our courage, our curiosity, our very presence. While clearing old furniture, I noticed something etched into the floor beneath a rug, symbols that matched those in the basement and hidden rooms, circles, spirals, lines intersecting in precise patterns, deliberate and deliberate. They seemed to pulse under the flashlight, almost alive. A soft whisper echoed through the room, low and guttural. "Leave. Now!" My heart raced. The air thickened, pressing against us, curling into our lungs with a metallic tang. The mansion was not just observing, it was asserting its dominance, reminding us that we were intruders. We moved through the east wing cautiously, every step deliberate. Doors that had been closed now swung open slightly as if inviting or warning us. Shadows twisted and leaned toward us, bending impossibly, gliding silently across the walls. In one corner, I found a journal partially hidden beneath a fallen beam. Its pages were brittle, filled with scrawled handwriting from long ago. It told of previous renovators who had encountered the mansion's judgment, who had ignored warnings, and who had disappeared without a trace. The words chilled me. The mansion's patience was long, but not infinite. As dusk approached, the mansion seemed to shift subtly. The walls themselves appeared to bend, the hallway stretching longer than it should. The shadows thickened, twisting into grotesque forms that vanished when we looked directly at them. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet we pressed on, drawn by the work and by the mansion itself. We reached the final room of the wing, a study lined with shelves of decaying books and papers. The air was heavy, thick with the metallic tang, as though the mansion had concentrated its awareness here. Inside, the shadows moved with intention, figures elongated impossibly, gliding along the floor and walls, circling us without sound. A low, guttural whisper echoed, "You do not belong." Mark backed away, eyes wide. I felt the mansion's presence pressing against me, deliberate, patient, omnipresent. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, distorted, as if testing our sanity. Every nerve in my body screamed to flee. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the study slammed shut violently. The lights flickered, dust and shadows swirled in the beams of our flashlights. The mansion had marked its territory. Its judgment was clear. We turned to leave, but the hallway seemed to have changed. Distances were altered, corners bent impossibly, shadows thickened with malevolent intent. The mansion was alive in every sense, deliberate, measuring, waiting. Hours, or perhaps minutes, later, we emerged into the main hall. The air had lightened slightly, the whispers faded to faint echoes, but the mansion had left its mark on us. The cold, the metallic tang, the sense of being observed, they remained, lingering in our bodies and minds. That night, as I lay in the temporary office, I realized the truth. This mansion was more than wood, stone, and history. It was a living memory, a sentinel of the past, deliberate in its judgment, patient in its observation. Renovating it was not just physical work, it was a test, a confrontation with something older, darker, and aware. The crew shared my unease. None spoke aloud of what they had seen. The shadows, the whispers, the metallic tang. They knew better than to challenge the mansion. We worked in silence, careful, deliberate, respecting the house's rules. By the final day, we had repaired floors, patched walls, and restored sections of wiring. The mansion seemed to accept our work, but I knew the acceptance was conditional. It had watched, it had measured, and it had judged. We were permitted to leave, but only because the mansion deemed it so. As we packed up and prepared to exit, I glanced back at the towering structure. Its windows reflected the morning light, but in the shadows behind them, I thought I saw movement. A figure, elongated and impossible, bending silently before vanishing from sight. I knew then that the mansion's awareness was eternal. It would remain, watching, judging, waiting for the next intruders. Even now, months later, I can recall every detail. The shadows that bent unnaturally, the whispers that echoed through the halls, the metallic tang that clung to the air, and the deliberate patience of the mansion itself. Renovating the mansion had changed me. It had marked me as an observer of its judgment, a witness to its awareness. Some houses are just buildings. Some houses are alive. This mansion, 150 years old, patient, deliberate, was alive. And it had judged us. We thought we had seen everything the mansion had to offer. After surviving the first wing, the hidden basement, and the east wing, my crew and I believed we understood its patterns. The shadows, the whispers, the metallic tang, they had rules, boundaries, and we had learned to respect them. Or so we thought. The next morning, the mansion greeted us differently. The sunlight slanting through cracked windows revealed dust motes swirling like tiny spirits in the air. The floors, freshly repaired in places, groaned underfoot, but there was a rhythm now, a deliberate beat, as if the house had adjusted to our presence. I led the crew toward the west wing, a section we had largely ignored until now. This wing had once been used for guests, according to the journal we had discovered. The air was colder here, denser, carrying that metallic tang we had come to associate with the mansion's awareness. "Notice anything strange?" Mark asked, voice low. I nodded. The shadows here moved differently, stretching across walls and floorboards in ways that didn't match the light. Every corner seemed to contain a presence just out of sight. And then I saw it, a figure at the end of the hallway. At first, I thought it was one of the crew, but no one else was there. The figure was humanoid, yet wrong. Its movements were deliberate, smooth, unnatural. It watched us, silent, patient, aware. My stomach clenched. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Mark's eyes were wide. "Yeah, what is it?" Before I could answer, the figure vanished. Not by walking away, but by folding into the shadows as though it were never there. The west wing was lined with guest rooms, each one frozen in time, beds covered in yellowed sheets, desks layered in dust, chairs pushed neatly against walls. But each room had its own subtle horror. A door slightly ajar that had been closed moments before, a chair moved from its original position, shadows pooling unnaturally. In one room, I discovered a diary wedged behind a dresser. Its pages were brittle, filled with entries from a family that had once owned the mansion. The handwriting was shaky, frantic at times. The entries spoke of strange visitors in the night, footsteps in empty corridors, whispers in rooms long abandoned, and shadows that moved independently. I read aloud, "They come when no one is watching. They know your fears before you do, and they wait, always waiting." A cold wind swept through the room. The candlelight we had set flickered violently. The metallic tang grew stronger, curling into our lungs. The figure appeared again, at the doorway, watching silently before disappearing into the shadows once more. The crew was on edge now. Their confidence from previous days had waned. Every creak of the floor, every shifting shadow, every whisper of wind seemed to carry intent. The mansion had a new rule. It would not allow ignorance. It demanded awareness. We continued down the hallway, cautiously opening each room. Behind one false wall, we found another hidden passage, a narrow corridor leading to a small chamber that had clearly been sealed for decades. The air was cold, thick, oppressive. The metallic tang was nearly suffocating. Inside the chamber, we discovered remnants of past intruders, old clothing, worn shoes, a broken lantern. Whoever had been here before had not left voluntarily. My pulse quickened. The mansion had claimed witnesses before. Suddenly, a door slammed shut somewhere above us. The sound echoed through the walls, reverberating in the floorboards. The shadows twisted and shifted, almost moving in response to our fear. The figure appeared again, closer this time, bending impossibly, gliding silently across the floor. Mark whispered, voice trembling. We should leave, but leaving was not simple. The mansion had ways of testing intruders, of asserting its control. Doors we had entered freely before now resisted, locks clicking into place as though guided by unseen hands. Shadows pooled at the edges of our vision, bending toward us, stretching impossibly, yet vanishing when we looked directly. We explored the hidden corridor further, finding strange symbols etched into the walls, circles, spirals, and intersecting lines matching those we had seen in the basement and east wing. The mansion's history was deliberate, encoded into the very architecture, a warning to anyone daring enough to intrude. As we progressed, the metallic tang intensified, curling into our nostrils, our lungs, our minds. Whispers grew louder, overlapping, distorted, as if multiple voices spoke simultaneously from nowhere. The figure glided closer, deliberate, observing. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning. Every sound was amplified, water dripping from unseen pipes, floorboards creaking under invisible weight, a soft shuffle in the corner of the room. The mansion's awareness pressed on us relentlessly, deliberate and patient. Eventually we emerged from the corridor, shaken, breathless. The West Wing had revealed its secret, a presence that was neither dead nor alive, yet deliberate, patient, and fully aware. The figure, the unexpected guest, had marked us as witnesses. That night, the mansion's judgment followed us into our temporary quarters. Soft footsteps above, doors creaking shut on their own, shadows bending impossibly. And in the corner of my eye that figure glided silently, watching before vanishing. We were no longer just renovators. We were intruders, witnesses, observers, and the mansion had made its awareness and its patience abundantly clear. The east wing smelled of damp timber and old plaster. Dust floated thickly in narrow shafts of sunlight that leaked through the broken windows. Every step made the floor groan, echoing down the long hall. Maya paused at a doorway, her gloved hand brushing the curling wallpaper. Footprints pressed into the dust led further inside, fresh among decades-old debris. I gripped my flashlight tighter. Something had been here recently, watching, waiting. The silence was heavy, almost sentient, pressing against our ears like a physical weight. We approached the workshop door. Its wood was swollen, edges cracked and jagged. I pressed slowly and it creaked, announcing our presence. Inside, dust layered the furniture and tools, untouched, but for a single hole cut into the floorboards. Sharp edges framed the darkness, a yawning gap that seemed to breathe. Maya leaned over the hole, flashlight beam trembling. The air was cold, damp, and carried a faint whisper that made my stomach twist. Whoever or whatever had dug this was still here, patient, silent, and aware of our intrusion. A thin grey hand emerged from the hole, dirt clinging to knuckles, long clawed fingers testing the edge. My heart pounded as Mark shone his light into the void. The hand twitched and vanished, leaving only a shallow depression in the dust. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. The mansion seemed to exhale around us, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. We stepped back in unison, uneasy, knowing we had triggered something far older than ourselves. The hallway stretched ahead, warped and strange. Floorboards flexed under our weight, groaning like the house itself was alive. Something moved above us, skittering across the ceiling with speed and deliberation. Not a rat, not a cat. The mansion's presence pressed against our senses, corridors elongating, rooms rearranging subtly. Maya whispered, "It knows we're here." My pulse spiked. Every creak, every shadow felt deliberate. We were no longer alone, and the house had already begun to manipulate the space around us. Upstairs, the bedroom doors were slightly ajar, Fresh scratches lined the plaster, long and deliberate, like warnings carved by invisible hands. Dust shifted along edges as if something brushed past unseen. Each step amplified our vulnerability. The mansion had transformed into a labyrinth, corridors stretching, doors moving slightly. Distances no longer matched the blueprints. We were intruders in a place that did not forgive. Each of us felt the oppressive weight of eyes we couldn't see. Every movement betrayed our location to something patient, calculating. The workshop called to us again. We edged forward, flashlights cutting weak beams through the haze. The hole in the floor seemed to shift subtly, the darkness deeper than before. A low, scraping sound rose from below, deliberate and measured. My stomach twisted. I tried to breathe normally, but every inhalation carried the taste of cold, damp air. The hand reappeared briefly, clutching the edge, twitching, testing. We didn't scream. Our voices had no place here. The mansion wanted us silent. The air was thick with anticipation, the building itself holding its breath. In one of the smaller rooms, the floorboards sagged beneath our feet. Dust spiraled in the weak beams as though something had moved just before our arrival. A faint trail of footprints led to the far corner, where the wallpaper was peeling in long strips. Marks carved into the walls resembled symbols, loops and jagged lines that made my stomach churn. The mansion felt aware, almost intelligent, as though it had observed countless intrusions before ours. I whispered to Maya, but the sound was swallowed immediately by the oppressive quiet. The faint light from the hallway didn't reach the back corner of the workshop. Shadows pooled there unnaturally, solid almost, pressing against the edges of our vision. I stepped closer, cautiously. Every nerve screamed to stop, but I needed to see. There was a small, rusted ladder descending into the darkness of the floor hole. The ladder's rungs were thin and uneven, coated in dust and grit. I shined my flashlight down. The blackness seemed to move subtly, like a living thing, rising to meet the beam. I recoiled instinctively. Mark touched my shoulder. "It's waiting," he whispered. The house had claimed the night. Every shadow, every draft of air, every creaking floorboard was a warning. We were trapped between curiosity and survival, drawn toward the unknown but terrified of what might emerge. Maya's breathing was shallow, rapid. She adjusted her flashlight, scanning the walls. Something watched from every corner. We could not see it, but we could feel its presence pressing in. The mansion had become more than a building. It was a predator. We decided to retreat slightly, but the hall had changed. Distances were longer than before. Rooms seemed to shift subtly, doorways no longer aligning as expected. Each step was heavier, measured, as if the house resisted our movement. The skittering above intensified briefly, then stopped, leaving only the low hum of something settling. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, pressing against us, filling every gap in our thoughts with unease. By the time we reached the main foyer, the front door rattled violently, locked one moment, swinging open a fraction the next, letting in a draft that smelled of wet earth and rot. Something reached through the gap, a dirt-caked finger testing, retracting, when Mark lifted his hatchet. The door slammed violently, dust and debris rained down. Silence fell, we froze. The whispering returned, layered, urgent, surrounding us from every corner. "Let me up!" Voices overlapping, stretching across floors and walls. We pressed back toward the staircase, trapped between our fear and the unknown. The mansion had claimed this night. Each whispered syllable, each movement of unseen hands reminded us we were intruders. The East Wing had been prepared for our arrival. It had calculated our approach, tested our courage, and waited for our presence to fill it. Every door, every shadow, every creaking board was now part of a larger plan we could not comprehend. We were prey in a structure that had lived centuries, patient and deliberate, and we were no longer in control. The east wing's darkness seemed to thicken as we moved deeper. Dust swirled in the flashlight beams, carrying the faint scent of rot and mildew. Floorboards creaked beneath our feet, echoing unnaturally. Maya stopped suddenly, pointing to faint scratches on the wall, long, jagged, as if something had climbed along them. I leaned closer, tracing the marks with my eyes. They were fresh. Whoever or whatever was here had been moving just out of sight, always deliberate, always patient. A cold breeze rose from beneath the workshop floor. The hole seemed to exhale, drawing us closer. My heart raced as a whisper slipped past our ears. Come down. Not loud, but precise, deliberate, shaped for only us to hear. I swallowed hard. Mark gestured for silence. Each step forward felt measured, like the floor itself was testing us. Shadows stretched unnaturally along walls, flickering just beyond the beam of our flashlights. Maya crouched beside the hole, inspecting the ladder rungs. Rust coated each one, but they were solid. The blackness below seemed to pulse, almost alive. My stomach twisted. We had no choice but to descend if we wanted answers, yet fear rooted our feet to the dusty floor. The whispers continued, layered now, voices of people long gone, calling out, overlapping, almost chanting. Our flashlights flickered. The mansion's presence was suffocating. I stepped first, carefully lowering myself onto the first rung. Cold metal bit into my gloves. Each rung beneath my feet groaned under weight that wasn't mine. Below, the darkness swallowed the light. I felt eyes from every angle, pressing, watching, calculating. The ladder swayed slightly, though there was no wind. A low scrape echoed from the depths, a sound of claws on stone, deliberate, patient. Maya followed, Mark bringing up the rear, each of us feeling the oppressive weight of the house around us. The basement, if it could be called that, was larger than the blueprint suggested. Walls lined with old timber sagged slightly, and patches of damp plaster flaked from the ceiling. Dust floated like tiny motes of memory in the air. A faint glow emanated from a corner where the outline of a door, or maybe an alcove, glimmered. The whispers now felt urgent, layered over one another, urging, beckoning. We moved slowly, flashlights cutting weak beams through the darkness, every sense alert, then movement. Something shifted just beyond the light. A pale hand shot out from the corner, fingers long and twisted curling toward us. It disappeared as quickly as it appeared. The whispers rose into a low chant, unintelligible yet clear in intent. Leave. Now. Maya's breathing was shallow. Mark's hand tightened on the crowbar. The mansion pressed closer with each step. The air was colder here, damp and heavy, as if gravity itself had thickened. We found old furniture stacked awkwardly against one wall. Dusty chairs, splintered tables, and rotting boards formed an obstacle course. Something moved between them, quick, deliberate, unseen. Each of us flinched as the shadows shifted unnaturally. A low thump echoed from the far corner, followed by a skittering sound across the ceiling. I caught my breath and whispered, "It's everywhere." Maya's flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, the shadows became more defined, like twisted silhouettes reaching for us. The faint glow ahead led to an old storage room. Rusted tools lined the walls, cobwebbed shelves sagged with age. The floorboards here were uneven, warped from water damage. And then we saw it, a trail of footprints, wet and dark, leading deeper into the darkness. The mansion's whispers grew louder, overlapping our own breathing, until silence became impossible. Every nerve screamed to turn back, yet curiosity, morbid and heavy, propelled us forward, A low scraping came from beneath the floor. Dust shifted near the edges of the room, then a pale figure emerged, not fully formed, more like a shadow with substance, moving with deliberate intent. We froze. It observed us, or maybe the mansion allowed it to appear. We couldn't tell. Its presence was cold, a creeping sensation that travelled up our spines. My hands shook as I lifted my flashlight higher. The figure receded, melting into the shadows, leaving only the oppressive silence behind. We moved cautiously to the far corner, where a faint light flickered. Broken furniture had been pushed aside here, revealing a trap door. The edges were splintered, and faint markings ran along its surface. The whispers condensed around it, rising in urgency. "Open me!" I glanced at Maya, who nodded subtly. Mark hesitated, then lifted the edge. Dust and a cloud of mildew rose from the opening, carrying with it a chilling draft that made our teeth chatter. The mansion exhaled around us. Beneath the trapdoor was another ladder, older and more rickety than the first. Descending, it felt like entering another world. Shadows stretched in ways that defied geometry. The whispers became voices again, distinct yet overlapping. Each step down was a negotiation with fear. My flashlight illuminated fragments of walls coated in strange symbols, etched in haste, or perhaps panic. The air grew colder. The floorboards below flexed slightly underweight that shouldn't have existed. At the bottom, the space opened into a long corridor lined with doors. Each door had scratches, gouges, and faint stains that made my stomach twist. Shadows moved independently of our lights, and whispers followed each step. The mansion felt alive, breathing with us, aware of our presence. The corridor seemed to extend endlessly, though our memory of the blueprints suggested otherwise. Every turn revealed new marks, new signs of life, or something that had once been alive here. We pressed forward slowly, each movement deliberate. Behind us, the faint scurrying continued, always just out of view. Our flashlights caught glimpses of movement, shadows stretching unnaturally. The mansion seemed to anticipate our reactions, bending the space subtly, warping distance, disorienting our sense of direction. Maya whispered, "We're not alone," and the words echoed in the empty space. I nodded silently, realizing that the mansion had claimed dominion over this part of the night. The corridor narrowed as we moved forward, the air growing colder with every step. Shadows clung to the walls like wet cloth, stretching unnaturally. Our flashlights flickered intermittently, casting brief glimpses of rooms filled with debris, overturned furniture, and scrawled symbols that made my stomach churn. Each symbol seemed purposeful, deliberate, a warning or a message we weren't meant to understand. The mansion had become a labyrinth, alive, reshaping itself around our fear. A soft thump echoed from above, then another. Something skittered across the ceiling, deliberate and fast. Not a rat, not a cat. My heart pounded as I shone my flashlight upward. The beam caught a fleeting movement, pale and twisted, before it vanished. Maya whispered, "It's everywhere." I didn't argue. The mansion seemed to have anticipated every step we would take, watching, waiting, shaping our path with unseen hands. We reached a corner where the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper. Behind it, the plaster was scratched and marked. Faint indentations hinted at someone, or something, pressing against it from the other side. A cold draught seeped through the cracks. Mark raised his crowbar instinctively. A faint scratching answered him, rhythmic, patient. We froze, listening. The mansion held its secrets close, teasing us, daring us to continue. Every nerve screamed to retreat, yet we pressed on. The next room was a storage area. Dust hung thick, disturbed only by our footsteps. Rusted tools and broken furniture were scattered across the floor. Footprints, fresh and deep, led toward a narrow stairwell descending further into darkness. The whispers returned, faint at first, then louder, overlapping, urging, "Go down." My stomach twisted. Maya's hand gripped mine, and Mark's breathing was audible, shallow and rapid. The mansion had begun to close the distance, shaping the path we were to follow. Descending the stairwell, the air grew heavier. Dampness clung to our clothes, chilling our bones. Shadows stretched along the walls, defying geometry, shifting independently of our flashlight beams. A low scraping came from behind, faint but deliberate, like claws on stone. The mansion was alive beneath our feet, each floorboard reacting to weight, each corner bending subtly to disorient us. I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move. At the bottom, the space opened into a long, narrow corridor. Doors lined each side, scrawled with fresh scratches. Shadows pooled in corners, independent of our light. A faint glow emerged from a far doorway. Whispering voices rose from the walls, overlapping, layering, urgent. "Leave, leave, leave." My hands trembled as I raised my flashlight. Something moved just beyond the beam, unseen but deliberate. We were intruders in a space that had long been patient. Maya stepped forward, scanning the walls. Dust shifted along the baseboards, a faint trail of movement. I noticed footprints in the dust, leading into a storage alcove. They were deeper than ours, heavier, deliberate. Something had passed recently, observing, calculating. The mansion's whispers coalesced into a low chant, unintelligible but filled with intent. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward us, pressing into our peripheral vision. Inside the alcove, the air smelled damp and metallic. Old wooden crates leaned precariously against the walls. A faint scratching continued from behind a stack of crates. I held my flashlight high. For a moment, I thought I saw pale fingers reaching out, curling around the edges of the crates. They withdrew immediately. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. The mansion exhaled around us, asserting its presence. We were intruders, and it had claimed this floor as its own. The whispers grew urgent as we moved back toward the stairwell. Floorboards groaned underfoot. Shadows flickered across the walls in patterns that made no sense, distorting distance and perspective. The mansion seemed aware of our panic, stretching corridors, shifting doors, bending perception. Maya whispered, "We're trapped," and the words resonated with truth. The house had learned our pace, our hesitation, our fear. We were prey in a structure older and wiser than ourselves. Finally, we reached a small door at the end of the corridor. It had been hidden by debris and peeling wallpaper. The handle was cold metal, coated in rust. As we pushed it open, a gust of icy air burst out, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and decay. The mansion sighed, almost disappointed, as if it had let us proceed only to see how we would react. Shadows coalesced in the corners, watching, waiting. Every step forward was measured, deliberate, forced by an invisible hand. Beyond the door was a narrow passage leading back toward the main wing. The whispers became layered, overlapping, repeating our names. The mansion's presence pressed against us from all sides. Shadows elongated unnaturally, moving in ways that defied logic. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on my back, and a chill ran down my spine. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet we pressed forward, driven by both fear and curiosity. The main wing came into view. Faint morning light filtered through grimy windows. For a moment, it felt like a reprieve. But the mansion's influence lingered, a low hum in the walls, a subtle vibration through the floor. We were not free, not yet. Something had followed us. Something had learned our faces, our fears, our movements. The east wing had claimed this night, and its presence would haunt us long after we left. We paused near the front door. Silence hung heavy, oppressive, as if the house were waiting for us to make a mistake. Shadows pooled in corners, moving subtly just beyond the edges of our vision. A faint scratching echoed somewhere above, rhythmic and deliberate. Maya whispered, "It's still here." I nodded, unable to speak. The mansion had taught us that curiosity came at a cost. Every movement, every glance, every breath was observed. The house had not yet released us. We stepped outside finally. The morning light felt harsh, almost foreign, after the oppressive darkness. Dust clung to our clothes and the air smelled damp and metallic. We did not look back. Behind us, the east wing remained silent, patient, waiting for the next visitors. The mansion had claimed its night, its prey. And we knew deep down that the shadows, the whispers, and the unseen eyes would follow us far beyond the walls. The summer camp had been abandoned for decades. Rusted swings creaked in the wind, and the cabins sagged under years of neglect. The forest surrounding it pressed close, branches clawing toward the broken windows. I stepped carefully on the path, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. Every step echoed in the empty air. The place smelled of damp wood, mold, and something older I couldn't identify. Maya shivered beside me. "It's like the forest swallowed this place whole," she whispered. I didn't answer. The feeling of being watched pressed against us like a living thing. The main lodge loomed ahead. Its doors were warped, splintered, and coated in years of dust. Broken windows reflected shards of sunlight that barely reached the floor inside. I pushed the door and it groaned, protesting the intrusion. Dust rose in lazy clouds. Inside, long tables were overturned, chairs broken. The fireplace was filled with rotting logs and the smell of decay was thick. Shadows clung to the corners, twisting and shifting independently of the light. Every creak of the building made my pulse spike. We moved toward the kitchen. Rusted utensils and broken jars littered the floor. The cabinets hung open like mouths frozen mid-scream. A faint scratching came from beneath the floorboards. I froze. Maya raised her flashlight toward the sound. The shadows seemed to shift, forming shapes that were not quite human. Mark whispered, "We shouldn't be here." The air felt heavier, pressing against us. Every instinct screamed to leave, but curiosity anchored us. The forest outside seemed distant, irrelevant. Upstairs, the cabins were worse. The stair creaked under weight, each step a warning. I noticed scratches along the banisters, long and deliberate. Footprints appeared in the dust, deeper than ours, leading down the hall. Something had been here recently. Maya's flashlight illuminated a corner. A faint shape moved, disappearing, before I could fully see it. The air turned colder. We were no longer just exploring. We had entered the realm of the unknown. Cabin 3 smelled of damp blankets and mildew. The bed was covered in torn sheets, and something had left dark stains along the mattress. A small wooden chest sat in the corner, its lid slightly ajar. I reached toward it, but Maya stopped me. "Don't," she whispered. The air vibrated with a low hum, almost a chant, layered and unintelligible. My heartbeat thundered. The shadows lengthened as if reaching toward us. One step too close, and the chest seemed to sigh, a sound that was almost alive. Outside, the forest wind picked up. Branches scraped against broken windows, making scratching noises that felt like whispers. The campfire circle was empty, but the ashes stirred as if disturbed by unseen hands. A faint figure appeared near the tree line, pale and fleeting, then vanished into the trees. I froze. Maya's flashlight darted toward the movement, but it was gone. The forest had claimed this place, feeding on the abandoned structures, the memories, and the trespassers who dared enter. In the craft hall, broken tables were covered in faded paint and torn papers. Symbols were drawn along the walls in a rush, jagged and frantic. Dust shifted along the floor as if something had brushed past. A chair rocked slowly, alone, back and forth. My pulse spiked. "It's alive," I whispered. Maya nodded, voice trembling. Shadows pooled in corners, watching, waiting. The building was patient, deliberate, and aware of our presence. Each step we took was measured, accounted for, observed. We descended to the basement. Old water pipes groaned, and the air was damp, carrying the smell of decay. A faint scratching echoed from beneath the floorboards. I shone my flashlight over the walls. Symbols had been etched deeply into the wood, jagged and purposeful. Something moved just beyond the beam, barely visible, testing, waiting. The whispers returned, low and urgent. Each of us felt a cold presence brushing against our shoulders. We were no longer intruders. We were prey in the abandoned camp. The lake behind the camp reflected grey clouds. A rowboat sat half submerged at the edge. A pale shape drifted just beneath the water, limbs twisted unnaturally, barely moving. I froze. Maya pulled me back, whispering, "We're not alone." The wind carried low moans from the tree line, overlapping with faint splashes. Every instinct screamed to run. Yet we pressed forward, drawn toward the main hall, toward answers we weren't sure we wanted. The camp had claimed the night, patient and relentless. The lodge's attic was accessible through a rickety ladder. Dust and cobwebs coated each rung. Ascending, the air grew colder, heavier. The beams groaned, almost warning us. At the top, old trunks were stacked, haphazardly. I noticed movement among the shadows, something watching, testing our courage. The whispers became layered, urgent, pressing. I swallowed hard, realizing that the camp itself was alive, feeding on fear, shaping our experience, bending space subtly around us. The hallways smelled of damp wood and mildew. Every step echoed, amplified by the emptiness. Dust swirled in our flashlight beams, thick and suffocating. Scratches lined the walls, long, deliberate, like warnings. Maya stopped, tracing the marks with her fingers. "Someone or something has been here recently," she whispered. My stomach churned. Footprints pressed in the dust confirmed it. Fresh, human-sized, but too irregular. The camp wasn't empty. Something watched, following, waiting. We reached the old dining hall. Long tables were overturned, chairs scattered, remnants of meals long rotted. A faint, hollow tapping echoed through the room. I froze. The sound came from the corner where shadows pooled unnaturally, curling along the walls. Mark raised his flashlight. The beam revealed a pale, twisted figure crouched among the debris. It moved quickly, vanishing before we could focus. The room exhaled around us, heavy, oppressive, alive. Outside, the wind picked up. Branches scraped against broken windows, sounding like fingernails. A faint, pale figure appeared at the tree line, watching us silently. We held our breath. Maya's flashlight darted toward it. Gone. The forest had claimed this place as its own, feeding on the abandoned buildings, the memories, and now us. Every step toward the cabins felt like stepping deeper into a trap. Every shadow was a predator. Cabin 5 smelled of rot and mildew. The bed was torn and stained. An old wooden chest sat slightly open in the corner. I reached for it. Maya stopped me. "Don't," she whispered. The air shifted, vibrating with low, unintelligible whispers. Shadows pooled in corners, twisting unnaturally. The cabin was alive, watching, feeding. Each movement we made was noted. Our presence stirred the air, triggered responses, set unseen forces into motion. The camp had become more than abandoned. It was aware. We moved toward the craft hall. Broken tables and torn papers littered the floor. Symbols scrawled on walls in jagged lines made my stomach churn. A chair rocked slowly, back and forth, alone. Dust shifted as if brushed by unseen hands. The whispers returned, low and urgent. Each of us felt a presence brushing past our shoulders. The building breathed around us, patient and deliberate. Every corner, every shadow felt alive with intent. The basement stairs creaked beneath our weight. Air grew damp and heavy. Scratching sounds echoed from beneath the floorboards. Faint, hurried, almost deliberate. I shone my flashlight over the walls. Symbols etched deep into wood glinted in the beam. Something moved just beyond the light, testing, waiting. The whispers layered, urgent, pressing. We were no longer exploring, we were hunted. Each breath, each step, each glance fed the camp's hunger. The lake behind the camp reflected grey clouds. A rowboat floated half-submerged at the edge. A pale figure drifted just beneath the water, its limbs twisted unnaturally. I froze. Maya pulled me back, whispering, "It's still here." The wind carried low moans from the tree line, overlapping with faint splashes. Every instinct screamed to run, yet we pressed forward toward the main lodge, toward answers we weren't sure we wanted. The camp had claimed the night. Upstairs, the attic ladder groaned. Dust and cobwebs clung to the rungs. Ascending, the air grew colder, heavier. The beams protested under our weight. At the top, trunks were stacked haphazardly. Shadows moved among them, testing our courage. Whispers layered, urgent, pressing. The camp was alive, feeding on fear. Each beam of light was tested, each movement accounted for. We were intruders, prey, observed by forces older than the summer we'd tried to enjoy. The cabins were lined with old beds, torn and rotten. Small objects were scattered across the floor. Broken toys, cracked plates, faded journals. Footprints in the dust led from one end to the other. The air vibrated with faint, unintelligible whispers. Something scuttled just beyond the light. A hand, pale and twisted, briefly appeared and vanished. The shadows pulsed with awareness. The camp was conscious of us, reacting, testing, stalking. We had become part of its experiment. The main hall's doorway loomed. Rusted hinges squealed as we pushed it open. Inside, long tables were overturned, chairs broken. Dust hung thick, stirred by movement. A faint scraping sounded behind us. We spun. Nothing. The mansion seemed to breathe, its presence pressing into our backs. Shadows twisted against the walls, moving independently of light. Whispers grew, overlapping, insistent. Each heartbeat felt amplified. The camp was alive, patient, and relentless. The floorboards creaked as we moved toward the exit. The attic above seemed to ripple. Shadows pooled unnaturally in corners. Faint movement at the edges of our vision hinted at something watching, waiting. The whispers condensed, urgent. Leave. Leave now. My hands shook. Maya clutched mine. Mark's crowbar was raised. Every instinct screamed to run, yet we pressed forward. Curiosity, terror, and stubbornness drove our steps. The camp would not release us easily. Finally, the front doors appeared. Morning light filtered through broken windows. Dust clung to our clothes, and the air smelled of decay. Shadows lingered, stretching toward us even as we crossed the threshold. The camp had claimed the night. Its whispers, its movements, and the unseen eyes would follow us far beyond the trees. Every step toward the forest felt weighted, debris. The forest outside the camp pressed close, shadows curling along the broken windows. Branches scratched the siding. like fingernails tracing the edges of the building. Every footstep on the gravel path echoed unnaturally. Dust rose in clouds with our movement, thick and suffocating. Maya stopped suddenly, pointing at long, jagged scratches along the cabin wall. "These are fresh," she whispered. I swallowed hard. Something had been here, watching, testing, waiting. The camp was alive, patient and deliberate. Inside cabin 7 the air was colder, heavy with mildew. Broken furniture littered the floor, overturned and coated with dust. A faint tapping echoed from beneath the floorboards. Not rats, not wind, something deliberate. I shone my flashlight over the room. Shadows twisted unnaturally in corners, forming shapes that weren't human. The whispers returned, layered, urgent, incomprehensible. Every nerve screamed to retreat, but we pressed forward. Fear had anchored us. Curiosity propelled us deeper. We moved toward the craft hall. Broken tables and scattered papers littered the floor. Symbols were scrawled in jagged, frantic lines across the walls. A chair rocked back and forth alone, slowly, almost deliberately. Dust shifted as if brushed by unseen hands. Whispers pressed into our ears, unintelligible yet urgent. The air was thick, alive, conscious. Every corner held a potential observer. The camp was not just abandoned, it was aware, feeding on us. Every step, every glance, every breath measured. The basement stairs creaked under our weight. Damp air rose in thick clouds. Scratches echoed beneath the floorboards. Symbols etched into the walls caught our flashlight beams, revealing jagged lines that were intentional, ritualistic. Something moved just beyond the light, testing, waiting. The whispers overlapped, pressing insistently into our ears. We were no longer exploring, we were intruders, prey in a place that had learned patience over decades. Near the lake, the rowboat floated half-submerged, water dark and still. A pale figure drifted just beneath the surface, limbs twisted unnaturally. I froze. Maya pulled me back, whispering, "It's watching." Low moans rose from the forest, overlapping with faint splashes. Every instinct screamed to run, yet we pressed forward. The camp had claimed the night, its presence persistent, patient, and alive. The forest was its ally, feeding the influence that lingered in every shadow. Upstairs, the attic ladder groaned with every step. Dust and cobwebs clung to the rungs, coating our hands. At the top, trunks were stacked, haphazardly. Shadows shifted among them, testing our courage. The whispers rose, overlapping, insistent. The camp had become more than structures and wood. It was sentient, reacting to our fear. Every light beam, every movement, every hesitant step, calculated. We had entered its world, and it had claimed dominion. Cabins were lined with old beds, torn sheets, and broken furniture. Toys and journals lay scattered. Footprints led from one room to another, fresh, irregular, deliberate. The air vibrated with whispers. Movement flickered just beyond the flashlight beam. Pale hands reached briefly, then vanished. Shadows pulsed with awareness. The camp observed, tested, and fed on us. Our presence mattered. Our fear mattered. Every step further immersed us into its control. The main hall door creaked as we pushed it open. Dust swirled in the beam of the flashlight. The faint scratching continued, now rhythmic, deliberate. Shadows clung to corners, twisting independently of light. Whispers layered, insistent. Every heartbeat felt amplified. The camp exhaled, pressing its presence against us. The building was alive, patient, deliberate, and aware of our every movement. It had been waiting for us. The corridor stretched ahead, longer than the blueprint suggested. Every step echoed unnaturally. Shadows moved just beyond the light. Something brushed our shoulders, cold and deliberate. The whispers pressed, urging us forward. We were intruders, and the camp had claimed its night. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but curiosity anchored us, and fear propelled us onward. The forest and the building acted as one. Finally, near the old lodge entrance, faint morning light filtered through broken windows. Dust clung to our clothes. Shadows lingered, stretching unnaturally. Whispers faded, but the feeling of being watched remained. We had survived the night, but the camp had left its mark. Its presence, its eyes, its whispers would follow us far beyond the trees. The abandoned summer camp had claimed us, and we knew its influence would never truly release us. The first light of dawn barely reached the camp. Shadows lingered in corners, curling unnaturally along walls and broken furniture. Every step we took on the gravel path echoed unnaturally. Maya whispered, "It's like the camp doesn't want to let us go." I nodded, though my voice was lost to the morning wind. The forest pressed close, trees leaning like watchful sentinels, branches scratching the remaining structures. Every shadow moved independently, stretching, curling, waiting for us to make a mistake. The main lodge loomed ahead, battered and quiet. Dust hung in the air like fog. We stepped inside cautiously, flashlights cutting through the dim, revealing overturned chairs and long tables coated in years of grime. Something shifted in the corner, just a flicker, a pale form disappearing before our eyes could fully focus. The whispers from the night before returned, soft and insistent, urging caution. The camp had not forgotten us. It had been patient, and it was still aware. Cabin 9 smelled of damp, rotting wood. Floorboards groaned beneath our weight. Scratches lined the walls, fresh and jagged. Something had moved here recently. I shone my flashlight toward the bed. Sheets were torn, mattress sagging under unseen weight. A faint scratching echoed beneath the floor. Maya gripped my arm, trembling. The camp was alive around us, feeding off fear, testing our reactions. Each movement we made was measured, accounted for. Each shadow pressed closer. The old storage shed was next. Rusted tools lay scattered. Cobwebs hung thick from the ceiling. A faint tapping sounded on a metal bucket, rhythmic, deliberate. Shadows pooled along the walls. Something had brushed past our shoulders, cold and deliberate. I froze. Maya whispered, "It's playing with us." We moved cautiously, each step measured, aware of every sound. The camp had become a predator, using the structures, the shadows, the whispers, all as extensions of itself. Outside, near the lake, mist rose from the water, curling like pale fingers. A half-submerged rowboat shifted slightly, though no wind disturbed the surface. Something beneath the water moved with deliberate intent, pale limbs twisting unnaturally. The forest around the lake was silent, yet oppressive. Branches scratched against windows and doors, sounding almost like whispers. I felt eyes on my back. Maya shivered. The camp was not just abandoned, it was alive, patient, and aware of our presence. We returned to the craft hall. Broken tables were coated in dust and debris. Symbols, scrawled in jagged lines across walls, pulsed under the flashlight beam. The air vibrated with whispers. Shadows moved independently, pooling in corners, curling and twisting as if alive. A chair rocked slowly back and forth, alone. My heartbeat raced. Each step further cemented the camp's dominion over us. It had watched for decades, waiting for intruders like us. Each heartbeat, each breath, each glance fed its awareness. Descending the basement stairs again, the air grew heavier, colder. Scratching echoed from beneath the floorboards. Symbols etched into walls reflected our flashlight beams, jagged and purposeful. Shadows moved just beyond the light. The whispers layered, urgent, and incomprehensible. We were not exploring anymore. We were observed, hunted, catalogued. The camp measured our fear and reacted to it. Each sound we made was acknowledged, each step recorded in a silent ledger the forest kept. The cabins along the far edge of the camp were nearly collapsed. Doors hung on rusted hinges. Broken windows exposed interiors where shadows twisted unnaturally. Footprints in the dust led from one cabin to another, fresh, irregular, deliberate. Something or someone had been moving between them. The whispers intensified, pressing against our eardrums, almost intelligible. "Leave! Now!" We hesitated. Curiosity had brought us this far, but survival instincts screamed to retreat. Back in the main lodge, the doorway seemed to stretch farther than before. Shadows clung to corners, twisting and stretching. A faint scraping echoed behind us, deliberate, patient. The air pressed against us, heavy and tangible. The camp exhaled, asserting its presence. Every object, every shadow, every movement seemed coordinated. We had become part of its environment, a new element in its web of control. The whispers were no longer random. They were aware of our thoughts, guiding and manipulating. Finally, the front doors were in sight. Morning sunlight filtered through broken windows, sharp and almost painful. Dust clung to our clothes. Shadows lingered, stretching toward us, moving subtly even in the light. The whispers faded but left their mark, an imprint on our minds. The forest and the structures had been patient, deliberate, aware. We had survived the night, but the summer camp's presence would follow us, lingering in every shadow, in every creak of old wood, in every memory of what we had witnessed. Crossing the threshold, the weight of the camp seemed to release slightly, though not entirely. The forest held its silence, branches swaying gently in the wind, hiding eyes that watched us. Every instinct told us not to look back, yet part of me knew that the camp was still alive, still patient, waiting for the next intruders to stumble into its grasp. Shadows and whispers, movement and intent, this abandoned place would never fully let go. I never believed a house could remember the people who lived in it. I always thought memory belonged only to the living. But after the renovation job on the Dalton property, I am certain that some buildings don't just remember, they resent. The house sat at the end of a forgotten road, hidden behind a wall of tall pines. The GPS marker would drift away from the driveway, like the land didn't want to reveal what lived there. The first time I saw it, I felt a pressure behind my ribs. The porch leaned forward as though it wanted to whisper something. The windows were so dark they didn't reflect light. They just swallowed it. My supervisor tried to be cheerful. He said we could modernize the place in 3 weeks. Foundation reinforcement, new wiring, new flooring, nothing major. Easy money, he told me. The owner lived halfway across the country and wanted to sell as fast as possible. She had inherited the house decades earlier but never returned. There were no nostalgic comments, no requests, just fix it enough to sell. Inside, dust coated everything like grey snow. The air tasted sweet, like old perfume. A wide foyer greeted us, with black and white tile curling at the corners. The parlour to the right was filled with draped furniture, tall shapes that looked like people frozen in place. The dining room to the left was worse. The table had collapsed, and the chandelier hung crooked, a few remaining crystals tapping gently, as if stirred by something unseen. We explored room by room, marking repairs. The upstairs needed flooring and cosmetic work. The basement, though, would be the worst. We went down the narrow staircase. The steps flexed under our weight. Each one groaned like something old trying to wake. The basement smelled damp and metallic. Stone walls, bare earth floor, and at the centre, an enormous boiler, cold as stone. It looked like it had been built before the house, too big for the space. A small room sat at the far end, sealed with a newer padlock. Someone had wanted that door closed long after the rest of the basement was built. We wrote it down and moved on. The first strange thing happened on day 2. I was working alone in the parlour, replacing rotten boards. The others were upstairs removing drywall. Their hammering echoed faintly, and below that sound I heard something else. A soft tapping, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I pressed my ear to the floor. The tapping continued. It felt like someone was on the other side of the wood, calmly knocking. I tried to tell myself it was just pipes or shifting beams, but something about the rhythm felt intentional. That night, the sweet perfume smell thickened, especially near the basement door. A co-worker, Victor, said he heard children talking downstairs. Faint voices, too soft to understand. He left early. The next morning, he didn't return. No call, no message. His tools were still in the basement. We needed to check the wall behind the locked room, so we called the owner. The instant we mentioned it, she snapped, "Do not open it." Her voice shook. When my supervisor explained we needed access, or else risk structural failure, she didn't care. She repeated it. "Do not open that room." Then she hung up. My supervisor cursed under his breath. He told us we'd have to open it anyway. We cut the lock. The metal snapped. The door opened halfway before hitting something soft. We pushed harder. It slid open and the smell rolled out. Sweet, rotting, heavy. There was a body tied to a chair. Rope still bound the wrists and ankles. Skin clung to bone like dried leaves. The face was hollow. The hands hung limp, palms down. Deep scratches dug into the floor stones beneath the chair. Whoever they were, they had fought for a long time. On the wall behind them, someone had carved 3 words into the stone. It remembers them. My supervisor grabbed his phone to call emergency services, but before he finished dialing, the basement lights flickered. Then they went out. We stood in total darkness. The cold sank into us like water. I felt the air move as if someone brushed past me. Then came that tapping again. Not from the floor this time, right behind us. 3 slow taps, fingernails on stone. Something whispered, just one sentence. It remembers. We ran. We burst into sunlight like drowning men. When the police arrived, we led them downstairs. The locked room was open. The chair was there. But the body was gone. No rope, no scratches, no carved message. The police told us we imagined it. Stress, mold, confusion. They told us to go home. But I remember what I saw carved into that wall. Even now I can still hear the tapping. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was the exhaustion, the storm, the endless hours in that decaying house. But every time I closed my eyes, the memory of that hollow face returned. I remembered the rope digging into the chair, the clawed scratches in the stone, the words carved with desperation. It remembers them. My mind raced with questions. How could a place remember something so cruel? Could it? I stayed at a nearby motel that night, but sleep didn't come easily. The wind outside was nothing like the sound of that basement. It was too empty, too small. I could still hear the tapping, faint but insistent, like an echo trapped inside the walls of my skull. I wondered if it had followed me. The next morning, I went back. My supervisor insisted. He said we couldn't leave a project incomplete. I agreed, though I felt every nerve screaming against it. The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that drags your own heartbeat into focus. When we drove up the driveway, the house appeared even more foreboding in daylight. Windows dark and watching, roof lines jagged against the pale sky, the front door sagging slightly as though the house itself had grown older overnight. Inside, the first floor smelled faintly of decay. I could still taste it, that sickly sweet perfume clinging to the air. The team moved with a mechanical rhythm, trying to act normal, trying to erase the fear pressing down on us. We set to work, reinforcing beams, removing old paneling, replacing broken floorboards. Each task felt heavier than the last. Each hammer strike echoed too long, as if the house was listening. We avoided the basement at first, though the locked room haunted our thoughts. When we finally went down, the air had grown colder, heavier. Our breaths hung in front of us like smoke. The shadows stretched across the walls, twisting and bending in ways that no light should allow. The boiler at the centre groaned quietly, like a living thing settling in its sleep. I noticed the scratches again, faint in the dust at the base of the chair. The floor was different than I remembered, though I had walked these steps a dozen times. My supervisor didn't see them at first. When I pointed, he frowned. "This is beyond the physical," he muttered. "Something else is here." We stayed just long enough to inspect, then left again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was speaking, shaping itself around our presence. Every time I looked back, it seemed larger, more assertive, as if it had grown while we weren't watching. Over the next few days, small things happened. Tools disappeared, not lost, but moved. A hammer left on a counter ended up on a chair in the opposite corner. Drawers opened that had been firmly closed, and always there was the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Soft at first, then louder, more precise, echoing through empty halls. I started to dread walking the corridors alone. Shadows moved in the corner of my vision, just enough to make me flinch. Floors creaked even when no one was upstairs, and sometimes I thought I heard whispers, words too faint to understand, just beyond hearing. One night, while working late to catch up, I stayed in the living room. A lamp on the end table flickered. The shadows danced across the walls, stretching and curling. The tapping began again, coming from the far end of the hallway, slow, rhythmic. I felt a pulse of fear in my chest, cold and raw. I followed it, not sure why, my flashlight cutting through dust that hung in the beam. At the end of the hallway was the locked room, still sealed, still whispering of something I didn't want to know. The padlock looked smaller, weaker somehow, like it could give way with just a touch. My fingers brushed against it. My mind screamed at me to pull away. I couldn't. For a moment I thought I saw movement inside. Something crouched, watching, waiting. The shadows shifted, the temperature dropped, and the tapping became a soft heartbeat, irregular and urgent. My rational mind screamed at me to run, to leave the house and never come back. But I stood there, frozen. Then the air pressed against my chest, a living weight. A whisper, cold and cruel, cut through my thoughts. It remembers. I bolted. I didn't check the lock. I didn't look back. Outside, the wind tore at the trees, the rain splashed against the driveway, and I ran until the house was just a black shape behind the pines. I didn't stop until I reached my car, heart hammering, soaked through, shaking like a leaf in a storm. The next day, I returned, but not to work. I returned to collect my things, my belongings, that had been left in the house. I didn't want to face it alone, but I had to. The driveway was silent. The house loomed, windows staring. Every instinct told me to leave. I stepped onto the porch, boots sinking slightly into moss-covered boards. Inside, the smell was faint now, almost gone. But the tapping remained. Tap, 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 echoing in my skull. I grabbed my bag from the parlour, my eyes darting to shadows that weren't there. The locked room sat in the basement, silent and ominous, the padlock gleaming like a small, mocking eye. I left. I never went back. Even now, sometimes, when the wind is right, I hear that tapping. Tap, 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 and the words curl around my mind, impossible to forget. It remembers, the house remembers, and so do I. After that first visit, I couldn't stop thinking about the house. Every time I closed my eyes, the images returned. The hollow face, the chair, the rope, the carved words. Sleep became shallow, broken by dreams where the house itself seemed alive. Its halls twisted endlessly, stairs leading nowhere, doors opening to walls. And always the tapping. Tap, 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 echoing like a heartbeat. I started researching the Dalton property, digging into old records, newspapers, anything I could find. The house had a history longer and darker than I could have imagined. Built in the 1800s, it had passed through generations of the Dalton family. There were mentions of servants who vanished without explanation, of children whose deaths were never fully investigated, of strange illnesses reported by anyone who stayed too long. Some records hinted at a basement beneath a basement, sealed over decades, forgotten by time and memory. Curiosity gnawed at me despite the fear. I wanted to understand why the house felt alive, why it seemed to hold on to the remnants of its past so fiercely. I returned during the day, ostensibly to check on work I had left, but in truth to see if the house would speak again. The front door resisted my touch, groaning as though recognizing me. Inside, the air was thick, still, and carried that faint sweetness. It was as if the house had been waiting, listening to my thoughts, anticipating my return. I walked room by room, each floorboard creaking under my weight. Shadows shifted in corners, though I was alone. The parlour, with its draped furniture, seemed to breathe, the dust swirling in faint currents around the edges. I remembered the tapping, and my ears strained expecting it. And then I heard it. Soft, deliberate, coming from the basement. I hesitated. The thought of returning to that room made my stomach knot, but the need to see, to witness, was stronger than my fear. The stairs moaned under my weight as I descended. The basement smelled of damp stone, mildew, and that faint perfume lingering beneath it all. The padlock on the small room gleamed, untouched. I didn't touch it this time. I simply watched, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. I began to convince myself that it had been a shared hallucination, a trick of fear and imagination, but then I felt the shift in the air. Subtle, almost imperceptible, a pressure like someone standing behind me, leaning close. And then the tapping, slow and insistent, echoing off the walls. Tap, tap, tap. I backed toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier, as though the house was resisting me, trying to hold me down. My heart raced. I told myself it was only my mind, only the wind, the settling of an old building. Yet instinct screamed otherwise. The tapping grew louder, clearer, filling the room with a rhythm that felt almost alive. I left the basement quickly, heart hammering, and rushed outside. The house stood silently behind me, black windows like eyes watching my every move. I realized then that leaving wasn't enough. The house had imprinted itself on my memory, and it wasn't letting go. Over the next weeks I tried to avoid thinking about it, tried to fill my time with other work. But small things followed me. Sounds in the dark, shadows where there should be none, and that tapping, faint at first, always returning when my mind wandered. Friends noticed I was withdrawn, jumpy, as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. I couldn't tell them. They wouldn't understand. How do you explain a house that remembers? One evening, unable to bear the silence, I returned to the Dalton property with another worker, someone I trusted. He followed reluctantly. We explored the house cautiously, step by step, floorboards creaking under us. The parlour was empty, the draped furniture swaying slightly as if moved by an unseen hand. The air smelled faintly of perfume, the same sickly sweet scent from before. We descended the stairs into the basement. I felt it immediately. The weight in the air, the cold pressing in from all sides. The padlock on the small room glinted faintly. The tapping began, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. Tap, 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 like a heartbeat echoing through stone and air. We watched, frozen. And then, in the corner of the room, I saw it, a shadow that didn't belong to either of us, moving with purpose. It was small at first, crouching near the wall, then rising, stretching, tall and thin, almost skeletal. It didn't speak, didn't move toward us, but its presence filled the space with unbearable tension. The air vibrated with expectation. I felt the words echo in my mind again. It remembers. I ran. My companion followed. The house seemed to resist us, doors shifting slightly, floors creaking, shadows stretching. We didn't stop until we were outside, breathing the cool night air, heartbeats colliding with our ribs. Even after that night, I couldn't forget. Dreams filled my sleep, or what passed for sleep. I saw the hollow face, felt the rope dig into the chair, heard the tapping in rhythm with my own heartbeat. The house had become a memory in itself, and I was trapped inside it, unwillingly. I realized then that some buildings are alive, not in the sense of creaking wood or shifting foundations, but in the sense that every person who lived there left an imprint. Every fear, every act of cruelty, every whisper of despair became a permanent part of its soul. And when you enter such a place, it remembers you, it watches, and sometimes it follows. The following days, I couldn't stay away entirely. Curiosity gnawed at me, stronger than fear. I would drive past the Dalton property, slowing down on the road, peering through the pines at the dark windows. Sometimes it felt as though the house was aware of me, its angles sharper, its shadows deeper. I could almost hear that tapping, faint, insistent, as if it were calling my name. Eventually, I returned inside, this time armed with a small notebook. I wanted to document everything. I wanted to understand. I moved slowly through the first floor, touching walls, listening to floorboards, measuring rooms. Every creak felt amplified, every shadow felt alive. The parlour remained the same, draped furniture, dust motes, drifting in the sunlight through grimy windows. But the air felt heavier, almost waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had been expecting me. I made my way down to the basement. The stone walls felt colder than the air outside. My flashlight beam cut through dust, catching the boiler at the centre, the locked room at the end. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. Tap, tap, tap. Slow and deliberate, coming from the far corner. I knew it would escalate if I moved closer, and yet I couldn't resist. Step by step, I descended. My boots pressed against stone and old earth. Each sound echoed unnaturally. The air became thick with that perfume smell, faint but unmistakable. It wrapped around me, clinging to my clothes and hair, and I felt a shiver of panic run through me. The padlock gleamed at the small room, untouched, yet it seemed alive, as though aware of my presence. I lingered near it, notebook in hand, but dared not open it. I documented every detail I could see. The scratches in the floor, faint now but still visible. The chair in the centre, dust-covered. The air that seemed heavy, dense, almost tangible. I whispered observations to myself, trying to remain rational, but the house's presence pressed against me as though it were reading my thoughts. Hours passed. I moved to inspect the far walls, taking measurements, noting cracks and water stains. The tapping returned, closer now, echoing through the walls in a rhythm that mirrored my heartbeat. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It was almost sentient, almost intentional. Something about the house wanted to remind me that it was alive and I was only a visitor. By late afternoon, I had mapped the entire basement. I exited to the first floor, heart racing, palms sweaty. The parlour's shadows seemed to shift with every step, furniture draped in the same ghostly fabric, dust floating in faint motes through the weak sunlight. I paused in the foyer, looking back at the basement door. I could almost hear it breathing, a low, steady rhythm beneath the tap, tap, tap. I left again, driving home slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror at the looming property. That night, I dreamed of it. The basement stretched endlessly, the locked room larger than possible, the chair at its centre more menacing. Tap, 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 echoed in my skull. I woke in a cold sweat, the whisper still clear. It remembers. Days passed. I returned to work on smaller projects elsewhere, trying to forget. But at night, the tapping returned. Sometimes it was in my apartment, soft at first, almost playful, then insistent. My mind couldn't distinguish between memory and reality. Every creak of floorboards, every distant sound in the neighbourhood seemed like the house reaching out. I felt hunted, watched, and powerless. One morning, unable to contain myself, I drove back once more. I told my supervisor I needed to check the foundation readings. He agreed reluctantly, sensing my obsession, but unable to stop it. The house greeted me silently, windows dark, air still but alive. I moved through the rooms methodically, taking notes, observing shadows, listening. The parlour remained unchanged, the draped furniture like silent sentinels. Dust swirled faintly in the sunbeams, and I felt it again. The weight of something aware. Descending into the basement, I felt the chill more sharply. The padlock gleamed faintly, untouched. The tapping came again, from within the room, or from the walls. I couldn't tell. My hands shook slightly as I held the flashlight, shining it across the stone walls. Every corner seemed to shift, bend, as though breathing. The chair remained, dust-covered, scratches faintly visible, as if carved slowly by invisible fingernails. I stayed in the basement for hours, documenting, observing, feeling the house's presence like a living thing pressing around me. I whispered my observations, knowing they were meaningless to anything but myself. The tapping continued, slow, deliberate. I realized that the house wasn't just remembering, it was communicating, not with words, not with light or sound alone, but with pressure, presence, subtle shifts in the environment. It was alive and I was inside it. By nightfall I left once more. My car seemed small against the darkness of the surrounding forest. The house loomed behind me, silent, watching, waiting. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of the property. Even then I felt the weight of its gaze. I knew I hadn't left it behind. I carried its memory in my chest, in my ears, in the ghostly echo of tap, tap, tap. I returned home that night, exhausted and trembling. Sleep eluded me. My dreams were haunted by the basement, the chair, the rope, and the hollow face. Tap, tap, tap. The whisper repeated. It remembers. I woke often, imagining the house in the darkness of my bedroom, the tapping travelling through walls, floors, air, following me. It became clear the Dalton house wasn't just a building. It was a repository of memory, of fear, of human presence. Every sound, every motion, every life that passed through it was preserved in some way, stored like a scar on its bones. And now I was a part of it. Weeks passed. I stopped returning to the Dalton property. I stopped driving past it. I even stopped thinking about it consciously, though the memory lingered, hidden beneath everyday life like a shadow. Tap, tap, tap. I could still hear it at night, faint, distant, almost playful, almost patient. Life went on around me, work, friends, errands, the mundane routines of living, but nothing felt quite real. I carried the house with me everywhere, the weight of its memory pressing against my chest, every creak of a floorboard, every gust of wind rattling a window made me jump. Every shadow in my apartment reminded me that some things follow even when they seem far away. I realized that some houses never truly let go. They remember the lives that brushed against them, the fear, the joy, the despair. And they keep that memory deep in their walls until the next person comes along. Curious, daring, or foolish enough to enter. I never went back. I never wanted to. And yet sometimes, when the wind is right and the night is quiet, I hear it. Tap, 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 reminding me. Whispering, it remembers. The Dalton house still stands at the end of that forgotten road, hidden behind its wall of pines, dark and silent, waiting for the next person who might wander through its doors, who might leave a piece of themselves behind, who might hear the tapping and understand, and too late, that some places are alive and some memories never die. And as for me, I will carry that house with me forever. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you're still here, it means you survived all 3 stories tonight. Not everyone does. Maybe you're sitting somewhere quiet right now. Lights low. Just listening. Or maybe you're lying in bed, trying to decide whether that sound you just heard came from your house or from somewhere else. If any of these stories reminded you of something you've experienced, a strange place, a night you can't explain, a moment that still refuses to leave your mind, share it in the comments. Your story might appear in a future episode. Tell me, which one of tonight's stories shook you the most? 1, 2, or 3? I'm curious to see. If you enjoy these nighttime journeys, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next time we step somewhere dark. And before you go, one last question. Do you think these places stay quiet after the people leave? Or do you believe they're still in there, waiting? Thank you for watching Minute 60. I'll see you again soon. Until then, stay safe, stay aware. And if you hear footsteps when you're alone, don't ignore them. Good night.